Last time on Secrets.
In moments, I was about to get handed the key that would unlock this whole mystery. I was going to find my father. After Reverend Johnson tried unsuccessfully to recall the name of the church, he put me on hold to get the person he was confident could tell me everything I needed to know. And after a minute or so, a woman with a soft, gentle voice picked up the phone and said,
"Hello, this is Sister Anderson."
Yes, the person who gave me the information I needed to find my father and his church was none other than the woman he was married to when I was conceived 37 years earlier. So it was she, the first Mrs. Anderson, who handed me the key to finding my father. It was Sunday morning, and I was on my way to my father's church. There are three things that darkness cannot contain: the moon, the stars, and the truth. All three will find their way through the darkness. Truth will often pierce its way through in unexpected ways, at unexpected times, and sometimes through unexpected people. Hello, my name is Lenora Howze, and you're listening to Secrets of the cHURTched, Revealed to Heal. It was a beautiful Sunday morning in South Florida on that late December day. I remember it like it was yesterday, although it was actually over 20 years ago. The sun was shining and the temperature, I'm going to say maybe mid-70s. Well, let's say this. It was warm enough that I didn't even need a light jacket, certainly not a coat. Now, keep in mind that unlike the day I was going to meet Marion for the first time, when I planned out my whole outfit, took my dozen roses, I was rocking my silver fox coat. Well, this time I had no idea that my annual winter getaway would end with me meeting my biological father. But no worries, your girl was sharp. I pulled it off. I knew I was going to be going to church while I was in Florida visiting Cynthia. We always did, so I definitely took my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. But this time, I was going to my father's church, unplanned, uninvited, and unannounced. Once I got the name and location of my father's church from the woman he was married to when I was conceived, the fate of this whole trip was sealed. Now, think about this for a minute. My father, Reverend Anderson, not his real name, most likely got up that day and prepared for church just like any other Sunday. Little did he know that on this day, on this particular Sunday morning, he was going to meet the child he left in the shadows of secrecy at a Pittsburgh hospital 37 years before. And that he was going to come face to face with his very own church secret. Let me just say this. I am still in awe of how suddenly a life can change in just one day. A day that starts out as a normal one like any other, but ends with your whole world being not so normal anymore. This Sunday was going to be one of those days for Reverend Anderson and for me. I was so nervous. Much more so than I was when I was headed to meet my birth mother for the first time. That day, again, was well planned for months, down to what I would wear and how I would introduce myself to her with a letter I had written. I headed to meet my birth mother knowing she would be at her job that day. But I was headed to meet Herb, not even knowing if he'd be there. After all, pastors do take a Sunday off every now and then. Some of them do. But one thing I did know was with everything that had happened up to that point and how it all happened was completely out of my control and completely in the Lord's control. So knowing that, I knew something was going to happen. Something was going to come out of this trip. Look, I've said it before many times, and I'll say it again. What are the odds? What are the odds that my biological father's first wife would be the one to lead me to him? Having a conversation with me, not knowing that I was her husband's daughter. That still blows my mind to this day when I think about it. And what are the odds that my father's church would be in the same part of the huge state of Florida that my girlfriend Cynthia moved to just a few years before? Yes, Cynthia, the girlfriend who I met at a random stop with her family on the Pennsylvania Turnpike on our way to Temple University. Yes, that girlfriend. But here I was, all these years later, and against all odds, on my way to the church my father pastored 2 days after arriving to Florida. It was Sunday morning. The drive from Cynthia's house to the church seemed like an eternity. Now, this was before we had GPS, which I can't even imagine living without now because I have no sense of direction. So without GPS and with just an address, and thankfully with Cynthia's handle on the city, the area where she lived, we took a couple wrong turns, ended up at a few dead ends, but nothing was going to stop us from getting to that church. Even if we ended up arriving at the benediction, we were going to get there. And after about a half hour of winding our way across town, we made it. Cynthia and I finally arrived at my father's church. Whew, deep breath. I had to take a deep breath because even telling this story now, all these years later, I can feel all the emotions that I felt that day. I remember we walked into the sanctuary to the sound of music playing, of course. People were singing, and certainly the ushers were right in place at the door to greet us. It felt surreal, like I was walking onto the set of a movie. We got there a little late, so the service appeared to be well underway, although no one was preaching as of yet. Of course, my eyes immediately went to the pulpit that was lined with clergy, all men, some in robes, some with collars on, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of them. And I had no idea which of them was my father or if he was even up there at all. So before the usher showed us to our seat, I asked her, "Is Reverend Anderson here today?" She said, "Yes, he's here, but he's not preaching today." Oh my goodness. I remember my heart started pounding so fast. I thought, oh my goodness, we came all this way and he's not here. He's not preaching. I wondered, can this usher see my heart and hear my heart beating as fast as I can feel it and somehow figure out that I wasn't just a regular visitor? But even at the risk of sounding like a crazy person, I had to ask her, "Is Reverend Anderson one of the men on the pulpit?" And to my relief, she said, "Yes, he's the one singing." Yes, he was singing loudly. His voice rang throughout the sanctuary, and for a moment, perhaps even for a few moments, it was as if no one else was even there. It was just me, an audience of one, listening to my father sing. A moment that abruptly ended, however, when my girlfriend nudged me to say, "Oh my goodness, you have the same type of voice as he does." And in terms of voice quality and the timbre of our voices, she was right. There's not much more I remember about that service, to be honest with you. I couldn't tell you which one of those men on the pulpit preached or what he preached about. I spent most of the service staring at and observing and examining every little thing about this man whose blood ran through my veins. Yet, to me, he was a perfect stranger. From his animated, high-spirited mannerisms to his physical characteristics, his height, his skin tone, looking for ways in which we were similar or not. And even though he wasn't the speaker of the hour that day, everything about him spoke to me. And I wondered, Had he thought about me at all since June 1st, 1959, the first and last time he laid eyes on me? Did he know that I had found Marion 7 years before? She never mentioned that she told him, so I assumed she hadn't. Did he even want to meet me to know who I had become? Or would he prefer that I stay buried deep in his past along with his other secrets? All this was going through my mind as I sat in church that day. But when the time came for visitors to stand up and give their name and where they were visiting from, I quickly came back to reality. And quite honestly, I thought I would pass out. Under normal circumstances, when you're at a church or when I'm at a church that asks for visitors to stand, and if it's a small enough church, they may ask for you to say something, I normally pass because, I just don't feel like it. But that day I knew I had to. So I stood up and very nervous, not because I had fear of speaking in front of a crowd. That's never been an issue for me, but I feared that when I spoke, when he heard my voice and when my father's attention was directed at me, that he would somehow figure out who I was. Remember, I look just like my biological mother. I've told you that, like ridiculously so. And even though he'd never seen me as an adult, he'd seen her. But interestingly enough, he didn't recognize the resemblance and put two and two together. At least not yet. So when it came time for me to announce who I was and where I was visiting from, no, I didn't have one of those big movie breakout moments and blurt out, "I'm your daughter." But instead, and as calmly as I could, I said, "Good afternoon. My name is Lenora Howze. I'm from Maryland, visiting in Florida with a college friend." That was it. I was careful not to say anything that would offer a clue about who I was. It was the one thing that I wanted to happen my way. So I made my brief visitor statement, took my seat with my cover still intact. So as the service came to an end and people began to leave the sanctuary, it occurred to me I didn't have a plan for how I was going to introduce myself. I hadn't written a letter like I did with Marion. There was no time for that. There was no call ahead to my father like the one my friend Carolyn made to Marion to let him know that something was being delivered to him. I was literally thrust into this moment, cold, unscripted, relying completely on the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And then my opportunity came. After the service ended, Pastor Herb went to the back of the sanctuary like a lot of pastors do, particularly in smaller churches, to greet and shake the hands of the people as they were leaving. Now, Cynthia and I did not leave our seats. We watched the people exit out of the sanctuary, but instead, we waited for the church to nearly empty out before we made our move. And just as the last person was leaving, Cynthia went up to Pastor Herb. I didn't. She did. And said to him that her girlfriend, me, wanted to speak with him. So without hesitation, he came over to the pew where I was seated, and the first words my father spoke to me were,
"Yes, you're the young lady from Maryland, right?"
"Yes, I am," I said, "but that's not where I'm originally from." But before the conversation could go any further, I asked Pastor Herb if there was somewhere we could go to talk privately. Now, I can imagine what he must have been thinking at this point and why it didn't seem odd to him that this total stranger who he was just meeting for the first time at his church was asking to speak with him privately. I didn't call ahead and set up a meeting. No one referred me to him that he knew of. But again, and without hesitation, he said,
"Yes. Let's go back to my office."
I think maybe he felt something. So after a few seconds of small talk about the weather and, how nice it was to be in Florida in December rather than in Maryland where it was cold, Pastor Herb asked me again,
So, you said you were from Maryland?
It was as if he was starting to, or at least trying to figure out who I could possibly be. So I repeated, yes, that's where I currently live, but that's not where I'm from. I was born in Pittsburgh. My response seemed to have little to no effect, so much so that he said,
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh.
Now, at this point, I'm kind of laughing to myself thinking, yes, sir, you sure did spend a lot of time in Pittsburgh, long enough to have a wife and a whole family, and me. But I really do think that by then he started to suspect that I was more than just someone visiting a college friend. But I don't think it had yet hit him that he was talking to his daughter. So then he asked,
I'm sorry, what did you say your name was again?
and that was it. I knew it was time to let him know who I was. So I answered him simply by saying, my name is Lenora Howze, but that's not the name I was given at birth. The name I was given at birth was Rochelle Thompson. And that's all I needed to say. That name, the name that I didn't even know I was born with until a few years before, was the name that was still all too familiar to Pastor Herb. He immediately knew that I was his daughter. And his reaction, you ask? You want to know? Should you wait till the next episode? I wouldn't do that to you. I will tell you now, his reaction was priceless. He started screaming and crying and praising the Lord. And in fact, he was screaming so loudly that one of his deacons, one of the few people left in the building, came running back to his office to make sure he was okay. And his response to the deacon that day is something that I will never forget. He said,
I am very happy. This is the day that I've been praying for. This young lady is my daughter.
It was Sunday morning. I went to church that day and met my biological father for the very first time. Well, my friends, that's it. That's the end of season 1, but not at all the end of this story. You see, meeting my biological mother and father, that was just the beginning of me learning who I really was. It helped me understand my life and some of the choices I made, some good, some not so much. Finding out what I was born into and who I was born to gave me an understanding of DNA, including spiritual DNA, that I would have never gotten had it not been for the Lord leading me to find and meet my birth parents. And for me, it settled for once and for all the debate over nature versus nurture, and which has the biggest impact on who we become. And in case you haven't figured it out by now where I stand on this after hearing 20 episodes of this podcast and my story, well, let me just tell you that I am confident that the biggest impact on who we become is nature. It's our DNA. It's in our blood. I believe that as human beings, we are an aggregate of our ancestors, a composition, if you will, of their choices, their actions, and their experiences. Much of what we do and even how we do it can be traced to someone in our bloodline, to someone in our genetic path. Now, that's not to say that we can't carve out our own personalities and our own paths, because we absolutely do. I did. But just know that we are carving out of a master template, a subconscious guide that informs who we ultimately become. Yes, this is my theory. And the proof of my theory lies in the generations of people who I've now come to know. People who were carved out of that same master template, that same mold as I was. My brothers and my sisters, my nieces and nephews, and even one very special great-nephew, Carter. who came into my life just a year ago and who is already walking the same path of his grandfather, my brother Sheldon, who he never got the chance to really know before Sheldon was killed. But despite that, he is so much like Sheldon, it's eerie. He is outspoken and unashamed to preach the gospel loudly, just like Sheldon was. Yeah, you heard me preach. At 5 years old, this little guy was holding court in public at a mall with total strangers, telling them about Jesus, praying for them, telling them to praise the Lord, encouraging them. At 5. All of that in his bloodline. So in the next season of this podcast, you'll get to hear from some of the people I've introduced to you along the way and how their lives were impacted when they learned about me. You'll hear what it was like for them to live at the center of all these church secrets and how their lives were affected by the decisions and the deeds and actions of those who came before us. Lastly, as we close out season 1, I want to go back to the question that I still get asked, and that is, why am I doing this podcast? Why am I willing to air what some would consider to be the family or even the church's dirty laundry? Well, I assure you, I have no malicious intentions, no axe to grind, no revenge to pursue. Everyone you've heard me speak of in this podcast is someone that I love. And for those who have gone on, someone whose memory I deeply cherish. But there are many whose lives have been wrangled with pain, unforgiveness, broken relationships, and even relationships they never had a chance to even have. And all because of a secret. And I've heard the same from many of you who have listened. That secrets and lies can be destructive, and even more so when they happen and are born out of the church. They can rob you of some of the best in life and bring you some of the worst. And the only way to overcome secrecy and deception as it makes its way through generations is with the truth. And that's why I do this podcast, my friends. So that the spirit of truth can overcome and even undo the damage of lies. So that people can be free and released from the chains of generational bondage that they've been in. So I will close with the same scripture that I started with 20 episodes ago from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 32, that says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And if just one person was made free from listening to this podcast, then my work here, for now, is done. So until the next time, and I promise there will be a next time, thank you. Thank all of you for listening, for your love and support of this podcast and of me. God bless you. And I pray that you continue to walk in truth.
You have been listening to Secrets of the Churched, Revealed to Heal,
a production of Be Inspired Global Media.
Stay on the lookout for announcements of new episodes in the next couple of months. If you need prayer or perhaps have your own story to share, please email us at mychurchsecret@gmail.com. I repeat, mychurchsecret@gmail.com. We look forward to sharing more truth in season 2 of Secrets of the Church. God bless you, and remember, you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free.